He only paused to check a weather alert, then froze. There she was, his ex-wife, with two little boys who looked exactly like him. The soft rumble of airport announcements hummed overhead as Gavin Shaw stood by gate E17, cradling his phone in one hand and his carry-on in the other. His gate had just been updated with a 30-minute delay due to weather in New York. He should have been annoyed, but his mind barely registered the inconvenience. The clamor of footsteps, the jazz playing from a nearby coffee stand, the sound of children squealing, all of it blurred into background noise. Until that laugh. It wasn't hers. Not exactly. But it echoed something he hadn't heard in a decade. Warmth. Light. Then another laugh, doubled and bright like sunlight skipping off water. He looked up. Two little boys in matching navy hoodies were bouncing beside a woman in line for boarding. They clutched her hands tightly as she gently ushered them forward. One of the boys dropped a paper, and she stooped quickly to pick it up, brushing back a familiar cascade of tightly coiled hair that had escaped her scarf. His breath caught. Naomi. His Naomi. Well, not his anymore. She looked different, but not in the ways time usually insists upon. She was still slim, her posture still upright, with that quiet grace she always carried. But her expression, once quick to smile, now held an edge, cautious like a woman who'd learned not to expect kindness. Gavin took a slow step forward, then another. His heart, usually armored in numbers and quarterly projections, gave a small, unfamiliar shudder. She hadn't seen him yet. Then she did. Her eyes widened. Her grip on the boys tightened. Naomi, he said, his voice barely louder than the static in the overhead speakers. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze didn't flicker. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then she nodded once stiffly. Gavin's eyes dropped to the boys. They weren't just familiar, they were mirror images. The same almond eyes he saw in his own childhood photos. The same dimple on the left cheek, the same mischievous brow arch, when one of them whispered something that made the other giggle. Are they? He began, his voice trailing as the gate agent picked up the mic and called for final boarding. Naomi's jaw set. We're late, she whispered, pulling the boys closer. Come on, Malik. Jonah. The names hit him like wind through an open door. She turned toward the gate, shoulders tense but unwavering. Wait, Gavin said, reaching out instinctively. Are they mine? She didn't look back. The gate attendant extended a hand, ushering passengers through. Naomi nodded quickly and guided the boys forward. One of them turned briefly to wave at a passing toddler, and something fell from his backpack, a folded piece of paper that fluttered to the floor near Gavin's feet. He bent to pick it up, his fingers, hesitating just before they touched the crayon-colored page. A stick-figure family. 4 people, 2 tall, 2 small. The tallest figure had dark hair, a big smile, and a phone in one hand. The second tall figure had curls and a dress. The children, identical, stood between them, hands clasped with their parents. His breath caught again. He stared at the drawing, his mind spinning through 10 years of silence questions, and now this, a sketch that said more than any text message ever could. Naomi was almost at the jet bridge when she turned. Their eyes met. It's not what you think, she said softly. Then she disappeared through the gate. The gate door hissed shut behind her, but the echo of her voice lingered. It's not what you think. Gavin stood, frozen paper still in hand, eyes locked on the place where she'd vanished. Around him, the boarding area buzzed with life, coffee cups clinked, children whined, wheels rattled on tile. But his world had narrowed to one moment, one woman, and 2 boys who looked like they could have stepped out of his childhood photo albums. The flight attendant cleared her throat beside him. Sir, are you boarding? He blinked, glancing at his phone. Flight 382 to LaGuardia. Departing now. His fingers closed around the drawing, folding it once, then again. No, he murmured. I'm not. She nodded politely and stepped back. Gavin turned, moving away from the gate, down the corridor, lined with bright overhead lights and artificial calm. He didn't even realize he was walking until he passed a Hudson News, the scent of cinnamon almonds pulling him back. He sat heavily on a nearby bench, elbows on knees, phone between his thumbs. The screen still glowed with the delay notice. 30 minutes, that was all it took for his life to unravel. 10 years, no word, no email, no phone call. Just a note on the kitchen counter, half a line unsigned, and then silence. He'd told himself she wasn't coming back. He'd told himself he didn't care. But Naomi had always had a way of slipping under defenses. Even now, she didn't flinch, didn't beg. She just held those kids like armor and walked away. His phone buzzed. Francine. The name alone tightened his jaw. Where are you? I told you to arrive by noon. The car is waiting. Do not embarrass me again. He stared at the message. The familiar chill of her tone, always disguised as efficiency, crawled across his skin. With a sigh, Gavin muted the screen and shoved it into his coat pocket. He wasn't going to New York, not today. Instead, he leaned back, head resting against the cool metal wall. The drawing was still clutched in his hand. The way the boy had looked up at Naomi, the way they had called her mama in the same rhythm like a prayer said often. He'd built entire companies on intuition, trusted it to read rooms, pitch investors, close deals. And now sitting on a bench in an airport concourse, his instincts screamed something he couldn't ignore. They were his sons. The realization settled in his chest, slow and heavy. Gavin stood abruptly, heading toward the Delta help desk. He didn't know where her flight was going, didn't know her number, address, anything. But maybe the attendant at gate E17 would. Back at the gate, the crowd had thinned. The same woman who had asked him to board now stood flipping through a manifest on her tablet. He approached cautiously. Excuse me, Gavin said, his voice low. She looked up, tired but polite. Yes, sir. The woman who just boarded with the two boys? Naomi Brooks. I think she left something behind. Is there any way I can— Flight information is confidential, sir? She interrupted, already shaking her head. Of course, he said quickly, pulling out the folded paper. I'm not trying to follow her. I found this. One of the kids dropped it. Could you maybe get it to her somehow? She hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the crayon drawing, then to him. Something softened. I can try, she said. Flight 382 connects in Charlotte. I'll make a note for the gate there. Thank you. She nodded and turned to her terminal. Gavin lingered a moment, then stepped back the hallway, stretching empty behind him. Charlotte. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in years, he realized he wanted answers. Not to accuse or reclaim, but to understand. Because once long ago, he'd loved Naomi Brooks enough to imagine a future. And now, standing at the edge of a path he never expected to take, that future had two faces. Both with his eyes. The concourse had grown quieter, but Gavin's thoughts surged like a storm tide. He wandered down past gates and cafes, trying to steady his breathing. Something had cracked open in him, and the ache it left was unfamiliar, even frightening. He ducked into a nearby coffee shop more out of habit than hunger. A barista called out an order for a pumpkin spice latte, and someone else laughed behind a newspaper. All the while, Gavin stood at the counter, dazed. He ordered an espresso, black, no sugar, and moved to a corner booth. From here, he could see gate E17 again, its digital sign now blank. He took out the drawing, unfolding it fully this time. 4 figures, a tall man, a woman with curly hair. 2 small boys holding hands, all of them smiling. One of the boys had scribbled J+M under the smaller figures, and under the tall man, AD scratched out, replaced by a shaky G. G for Gavin. He traced it slowly with his thumb. The boys had drawn him into their world. Had Naomi talked about him, shown them a photo, told them any part of the truth? And why now? Why today? Why, after all these years, was she suddenly in the same airport, on the same morning, at the same gate? He remembered how she'd looked. No makeup? Soft sweater, scuffed sneakers? She had aged, not in the harsh way some people did, but gently like a painting gaining layers. And her eyes, always fierce, still held something. Brave. The espresso had cooled. He drank it anyway, grimacing at the bitterness. On instinct, he pulled out his phone and searched Naomi Brooks. Atlanta. Art assistant. He scrolled past a dozen results. LinkedIn profiles, art school blogs, an old community center website. There. A name in small print. Assistant curator, South River Children's Gallery. Naomi B. He clicked. The webpage was outdated, but the image was unmistakable. Her. In front of a mural. Smiling. The gallery was 20 minutes from the airport. He sat back uncertain. His flight was long gone. Francine was likely fuming. But none of that mattered now. He flagged down a rideshare and gave the address. On the way there, rain began to fall light misty. The driver didn't talk much, and Gavin was grateful. His mind spun too fast to make small talk. Outside the gallery, the building looked modest. Bright red bricks ivy climbing one wall, and a handmade sign that read, "Imagination starts here." The windows were painted with paper turkeys and falling leaves. Inside he could see papier-mâché sculptures, a drying rack of finger paintings. It was closed. A woman inside, maybe a janitor, spotted him and came to the door. "We open on Tuesday," she called. "I'm not here for the art," Gavin said gently. "I'm looking for someone. Naomi Brooks." She frowned. "Naomi's off today, flying out to see family." "Did she say where?" Didn't mention. The woman shrugged. "Just said she was taking her boys to meet someone important." Something twisted in Gavin's chest. He thanked her and turned away. Back in the car, he stared out at the soft Atlanta drizzle, feeling like a man chasing shadows. He needed to regroup. Not confront, not accuse. Just ask. His hotel suite was sterile, all marble counters and minimalist furniture. He kicked off his shoes, loosened his tie. The folded drawing went on the nightstand. For a long moment he stood there, just looking at it. Then he picked up his phone and opened a blank message. To Naomi Brooks. Subject: the drawing. "I saw you today. I don't know what's true anymore, and I'm not here to make things harder. But I think I deserve to know. Are they mine?" He paused, then deleted the last line. Too blunt. Try again. "I saw you today. I wasn't expecting it. But now I can't unsee those boys. Or how you held them. Or how one of them dropped a drawing that looks a lot like us. Still too much." He closed the draft. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe she wasn't either. Instead, he took the drawing and carefully slid it into his briefcase. Whatever came next would have to start from truth. And the only way to find it was to face her again. But for now, he lay down on the bed, fully clothed, shoes forgotten on the carpet. Outside, the rain thickened. A knock on the door startled him. He rose slowly, unsure who could possibly. Another knock. More urgent. He opened the door. A hotel staff member handed him a small package. "Delivery for Mr. Shaw," the man said, nodding politely. Gavin took it, confused. "Who from?" The staffer only shrugged. No note. He closed the door, unwrapped the plain brown paper. Inside was a sketchbook. He recognized it instantly, Naomi's old one. Leather cover, frayed binding. There was no letter, just a sticky note on the front. "You once said truth matters more than timing. I'm trusting that now." And tucked inside the first page, a photograph, Naomi, Malik, and Jonah at a pumpkin patch. The boys wore the same hoodies. They were laughing. She was beaming. And there, off to the corner, was a his hand from an old photo she must have spliced in. They had made a family. Even if he didn't know it, he stood there stunned. The flight attendant asks, "Sir, are you boarding?" Gavin doesn't move. Gavin had faced hostile boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, but nothing rattled him like one woman walking away in silence. He sat motionless in the dim glow of his Atlanta penthouse, the city stretching like glittering veins outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Night had long settled in, but Gavin's mind refused rest. His fingers hovered over his laptop's trackpad, pausing on an old photo album. He didn't even remember uploading one from 8, maybe 9 years ago. There she was, Naomi, smiling beside a half-finished mural paint on her cheek, light in her eyes. His eyes, now that he thought about it, were mirrored in those twin boys. Eyes he couldn't stop seeing. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. The sketch still sat on the kitchen island where he'd placed it earlier. 2 small boys, a woman with spirals for hair, and a tall man with a question mark for a face. That one careless detail pierced deeper than he expected. Who had drawn that symbol, Jonah or Malik? Did they ask about him? Did they imagine someone else standing in that spot? His phone buzzed again. "Francine, I hope this ridiculous distraction is over. Your father would be disgusted. Keep your distance, Gavin. Old wounds don't deserve reopening." He deleted the message without replying. Down in Savannah, Naomi moved quietly through her house, careful not to creak the floorboards outside the boys' room. The modest 2-bedroom rental sat on the edge of Starling Heights, a working-class neighborhood where neighbors still waved and kids biked until the porch lights blinked on. She stood in the hallway now, a worn copy of Goodnight Moon pressed against her hip. Malik had already drifted off his thumb halfway to his mouth, but Jonah stirred when she leaned to kiss his forehead. "Mama," he whispered sleepily. Why was that man staring at us? Naomi froze for a heartbeat. She sat gently on the edge of the bed. He was probably just surprised to see twins at the airport, baby. That's all. But he looked like us, Jonah mumbled. She smoothed the blanket over his shoulders. Lots of people have dark eyes and curly hair, Joe. Sleep now. He didn't press further, his breathing already slowing into the familiar rhythm of sleep. She watched him for another long moment, then stood and closed the door softly behind her. In the kitchen, the dishes were still stacked from breakfast. She filled the kettle, put it on the stove, and leaned against the counter. Outside the window, a neighbor's dog barked once, then fell quiet. Crickets hummed in the dark. Her porch swing creaked faintly in the wind. Her phone lit up with a text from Miss Hattie. "Baby girl, my heater's clicking again. You mind?" Naomi smiled despite herself. She grabbed her jacket and a flashlight from the hook by the door. 2 minutes later, she stood on Miss Hattie's porch, knocking gently. "Come on in, child," came the voice from within. Miss Hattie was wrapped in a wool cardigan, slippers shuffling over the linoleum as she waved Naomi toward the hallway. Things clicking like it's about to take off for Jesus. Naomi laughed, setting down her flashlight and kneeling beside the old electric unit. "Let me guess you turned it on full blast again." "Lord, yes. My knees don't like this November chill." She peered down at Naomi. "How'd the flight go?" Naomi hesitated. "Uneventful." Miss Hattie didn't push. She never did. 10 minutes and a reset switch later, the clicking stopped. Naomi stood and wiped her hands on a dish towel Miss Hattie had insisted she take. The older woman handed her a mason jar of sweet tea, like always. "Sugar calms the nerves," she said. Back at home, Naomi sipped the tea on her porch swing blanket over her legs. She listened as the heater purred inside the boys sleeping soundly in their room. Her fingers traced the condensation on the glass. She hadn't answered the call from that unknown Atlanta number earlier, though her gut told her exactly who had made it. She looked up at the stars hidden behind gray clouds and whispered into the silence, "Don't worry, we're okay." Morning in Savannah crept in gently with the faint scent of dew and the low hum of cicadas warming up for the day. Naomi stood at her stove in a pair of worn slippers stirring grits while the boys drew shapes on fogged-up windows with their fingertips. Light spilled softly across the kitchen tiles. "Toast or biscuit?" she asked over her shoulder. "Biscuit," they chorused. She smiled and cracked 2 eggs into the pan, the sizzle rising above the local radio's soft gospel playing in the background. It was these mornings she treasured most, simple, steady, filled with the kind of quiet love that didn't ask for anything in return. "After breakfast, y'all help me pack the art kits, okay?" she said, glancing toward the dining table, where plastic bins and crayon boxes waited. "Is it painting day?" Malik asked, his mouth full of biscuit. "Finger painting day," Naomi confirmed, and both boys whooped in delight. Meanwhile, 150 miles north in Atlanta, Gavin hadn't touched his breakfast. The smoothie sat sweating on the counter as he leaned over his laptop, scanning old emails with a furrowed brow. Somewhere between legal memos and quarterly summaries, he found one from Naomi dated 9 years ago. "I'm sorry I can't stay. Please don't look for me. It's better this way." There was no name at the bottom, no explanation, just that. He didn't even remember receiving it. At the time, he'd been negotiating an acquisition in London, too consumed with landing the deal of his career. He closed the lid abruptly, stood, and crossed to the window. What had he missed? He thought of those boys again, the way one had reached for Naomi's hand, without even looking, like it was the safest place on earth. A reflex, a bond. And the question, why was that man staring at us? He'd barely slept, and when he did, he saw them everywhere, in airport terminals, in boardrooms, even in reflections of himself. The question mark on the stick figure sketch haunted him most. Across the room, his phone buzzed. "Gavin Shaw," he answered. "Mr. Shaw, this is Devon. I found her last known address through a public record search. She's in Savannah, Starling Heights neighborhood." Gavin pinched the bridge of his nose. "Send me the details. Should I book a car for you?" He hesitated. "No, I'll drive myself." In Savannah, the morning moved on without incident. Naomi loaded her trunk with tote bags full of paint jars, brushes, and oversized paper rolls. The boys climbed into the back seat, already smudging color on their hands before they left the driveway. At the Drip and Sip Cafe, she placed their usual order: 2 kids' hot chocolates, 1 lavender chai, and a cinnamon bun to share. "Morning, Naomi," the barista called out. "Boys got paint on them already. Wouldn't be a Thursday if they didn't," she replied with a chuckle. The cafe buzzed with early patron seniors in windbreakers, college kids hunched over laptops, and a few construction workers refueling on espresso shots. Naomi leaned against the pickup counter, watching the boys poke each other with straws. "You're patient," said a voice beside her. She turned to find a woman, maybe late 40s, dressed in scrubs and holding a tea. "Not everyone handles 2 at once with that much grace." Naomi offered a modest smile. "They teach me patience every day." The woman nodded knowingly. "I raised 3 on my own. You learn fast or you go crazy." As the drinks arrived, Naomi thanked her and waved the boys over. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown Atlanta number. She declined it without looking. At the community center, she spread paper across fold-out tables and poured blobs of color into trays. Children filed in their laughter, echoing through the modest gym-turned-art studio. The twins in their element helped pass out aprons. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Naomi stood by the door for a moment, watching the light shift across the cracked sidewalk. She felt the stirrings of something unnamed, like the moment before a storm, or the hush before music begins. Something was coming, or someone, but she shook it off. There was work to do and paintings to dry. Naomi's hands moved instinctively, dabbing paint off one child's cheek with a damp towel, while answering another's question about mixing purple. Her art class was always a bit chaotic, but it was a joyful kind, the kind where smudges meant curiosity and laughter meant focus. "Miss Naomi," one little girl called out, pointing to her canvas. "Is it okay if the sun is purple?" Naomi smiled, crouching beside her. "It's your sky, sweetheart. You make it any color you want." The room buzzed with life. Jonah was teaching Malik how to flick a toothbrush for speckle effects, and one of the neighborhood moms had brought in oatmeal cookies for the kids. The center's heater kicked on with a clang, reminding everyone winter wasn't far. As she moved between tables, Naomi's eyes kept flicking toward her phone on the corner counter. No more calls from the Atlanta number, but that didn't settle the unease in her chest. She had hoped 10 years was enough time, that life had let them drift apart for good. But some men didn't vanish. They clung to your memory like old perfume, faint familiar and impossible to scrub clean. Later that night, after baths and bedtime stories, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. The boys were asleep, tangled in Star Wars blankets, their faces peaceful and smudged with dried paint. She flipped through her sketchbook, landing on an unfinished page. 4 figures, 2 small, 1 woman, and a tall, faceless man. She added a single question mark above the man's head and closed the book quietly. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text. "Heard from someone you're back in town. How have you been?" "Caleb." She exhaled through her nose. Caleb had been a comfort once. Kind, helpful with the boys, but never pushing. Still, there wasn't room for someone else in her heart, not while she still carried that ache. She didn't reply. Next door porch lights flicked on. Miss Hattie had forgotten to close her blinds again. Naomi pulled on a cardigan and stepped outside. The air was brisk and smelled faintly of pine. Her porch creaked gently underfoot. Savannah evenings always carried a hush, as if the whole town respected bedtime. She knocked softly and let herself in. "Hattie," she called out. "In the kitchen, baby," the old woman replied. Naomi found her standing near the fridge, confused. "Was I making tea?" she asked, blinking. Naomi nodded. "You were. I'll finish it for you." She warmed the water, stirred in sugar like Hattie liked it, and sat with her for a few minutes. They talked about the kids' paintings, about the neighbor's dog always stealing mail, and about a new gospel concert coming to town. It was ordinary, gentle. "I saw your boys today," Hattie said, as Naomi stood to leave. "They're growing tall like their daddy." Naomi froze for a beat. "You mean Gavin? I remember his shoulders more than his face," Hattie chuckled. "Boy used to sit like a statue. But he loved you. Even I could see that." Naomi looked down. "That was a long time ago. Time don't wash away love, baby. Just makes you think you've outgrown it. Back at home, Naomi locked the door and leaned against it. The night seemed quieter than usual. She glanced once more at her phone. No more calls, no more messages. She turned off the lights and crawled into bed between her sons. They didn't stir. She closed her eyes, wrapping one arm around Malik, the other around Jonah, and whispered into the dark, "Don't worry, we're okay." Several hours later, headlights cut through the hush of Starling Heights. A black sedan slowed as it reached Naomi's street, its engine nearly silent. The driver's window lowered slightly. Gavin's jaw clenched as he spotted her mailbox, still with the same hand-painted bluebirds she'd made in college. He didn't park. He didn't knock. He just sat there for a moment, staring at the house as if it might blink back at him. Then he whispered to himself, "Savannah." 3 hours of road and regret. Gavin didn't know what he was driving toward. But he couldn't turn back. The sun was still low in the sky when he crossed the Savannah city limits, golden light skimming the tops of pine trees and casting long shadows across old brick storefronts. His phone buzzed in the cup holder directions, chirping in a soft GPS voice, but he barely heard it. The last hour of the drive had passed in a blur, fall leaves whipping past like questions he wasn't ready to answer. The closer he got, the more the air shifted. Atlanta had been all steel and strategy. Here the air smelled like earth and distant rain, with the tang of river moss carried on the breeze. He rolled down his window just a bit, hoping to clear his head. It didn't help. He turned onto Whitaker Street and pulled in front of a restored Victorian painted sage green. The Airbnb's listing had called it charming, but Gavin saw history in the warped porch steps and hand-painted shutters. He got out stiffly, his suit jacket already too formal for the morning's softness. A woman on the sidewalk paused as he walked past, giving him a once-over before smiling politely. "You're not from around here, huh?" Gavin blinked. "What gave me away?" "Shoes too shiny," she said, then continued on, her dog trotting beside her. Inside, the Airbnb smelled like lavender and lemon polish. Gavin dropped his bag by the couch and sat at the edge of a floral armchair, elbows on knees, trying to steady his breathing. He had no plan, no appointment, just a week's worth of sleepless nights and a sketch in his wallet drawn by a 6-year-old who might be his son. At 8:12 a.m., he stepped back outside. He didn't have to wait long. Across the street, Naomi emerged from her housecoat, pulled tight, the boys bouncing at her side. They were wearing new backpacks and chattering about Friday Folder Day and Miss Darnell's sticker chart. Gavin's breath caught. She looked the same, maybe a little stronger. Her hair was pulled back into a low twist, gold hoops catching the morning light. The boys walked ahead unaware of him, but Naomi froze when she saw him on the sidewalk. For a moment, the noise of the world buses, birds, the hum of life faded. Gavin raised a tentative hand. Naomi didn't wave back. She caught up to the boys and leaned down to fix one's collar, whispering something only they could hear. Then she stood straight and crossed the street toward him, her eyes cautious, her spine perfectly straight. "Morning," she said flatly. "Hi," Gavin replied, the word catching like sandpaper in his throat. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you." Her eyes flicked toward the boys. "You've seen us. Now what?" "I don't know," he admitted. They stood in awkward silence as the twins walked ahead to the corner. Gavin watched one of them skip a crack in the sidewalk like it was lava. The other kicked at a pine cone. Naomi sighed. "They don't know who you are. They think you're someone from the airport. A stranger." Gavin's mouth opened, but no words came out. "You should go." "Naomi." She held up a hand. "If you really want to talk, there's a diner down the block. Mrs. Penny's. But I'm walking them to school first." "I'll wait." Naomi didn't reply. She turned and walked away, the hem of her coat catching in the breeze, the boys bounding beside her. Gavin stayed on the sidewalk long after they disappeared around the corner. Mrs. Penny's diner looked exactly like the kind of place where time slowed down. A weathered Coca-Cola sign hung over the door, and the windows were fogged from inside, tracing light halos around handwritten specials: catfish platter, sweet potato fries, pecan pie by the slice. The bell jingled as Gavin stepped in. A waitress in her 50s with red glasses looked up from pouring coffee. "Grab a booth," she said with a nod. "We're friendly, promise." He did, settling into the corner booth near the window. A ceiling fan creaked above. Jazz hummed from a vintage radio near the register. It reminded him of places he'd once called home before penthouses and black car service became normal. When Naomi walked in, heads turned. Not because she was dramatic, but because she belonged. Mrs. Penny gave her a warm smile. "Mornin' sugar. You want the usual? Please." "And a decaf for me," Naomi replied, keeping her eyes forward as she slid into the seat across from Gavin. For a moment they just sat there, the formica table between them, an invisible trench. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I'm not staying long." "Fair." Naomi folded her hands in her lap. "What do you want from me, Gavin?" He looked down at the table. Answers. Maybe a second chance to ask the right questions. Mrs. Penny appeared with 2 mugs. "Your food'll be up in a minute," she said gently, then walked off, giving them space. Naomi wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "You didn't show up for the ultrasound, or the appointment after." "I called once, left a message." He flinched. "I never got it." "I figured." She took a sip of coffee and continued. "I didn't chase you. Not because I didn't care, but because I had to choose peace." Gavin looked up. "You never told me. Not even when you left." "I wanted to at first," she said. "But every time I tried, I remembered how many things I'd already been quiet about. How many dinners you missed. How many gallery nights I stood alone." Gavin leaned back. "That night, the art show. I haven't forgotten." Naomi nodded slowly. "That was the first time I realized I'd married someone who didn't really see me." The silence between them thickened. Only the clink of forks and low chatter of other diners filled the space. "I see you now," Gavin said quietly. Naomi gave him a look that was equal parts tired and tender. "You see 2 little boys with your eyes and suddenly remember I existed. I didn't know, but you could have." She cut in, not harsh, just honest. 10 years is a long time to not wonder. Mrs. Penny returned with their plates. "You should eat while it's hot," she said, setting down a plate of sweet potato fries for Gavin, shrimp, and grits for Naomi. He stared at his plate. "I forgot how good real food tastes." Naomi smiled faintly. "Don't say that too loud in here. You'll offend half the county." They ate in near silence after that. Not angry silence, just waited. At one point, Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out a flyer. She slid it across the table. "I teach weekend art classes, mostly for kids, but a few adults come in too." Gavin studied it. A cartoon palette with smiling brushes danced under bold block letters. "Create your story. Saturdays, 10 a.m. He tapped the corner. "You did this," Naomi shrugged. "We don't all IPO our dreams. Some of us teach finger painting and make rent." He smiled. "It's beautiful." Naomi shook her head, a chuckle slipping out. "Flattery won't fix this." "I know." Just then, laughter erupted outside the diner. Through the window, they could see a school group passing by. Jonah and Malik were among them, walking hand in hand with classmates, their faces bright. Jonah looked through the window and spotted Gavin. He pointed. "That's the airport man," he said, pressing his face to the glass. Gavin's heart caught in his throat. The door jingled again and the twins bounded in before anyone could stop them. Jonah ran straight to Gavin and without hesitation wrapped his arms around his waist. Gavin froze. Naomi sat up straight, eyes wide. Malik stood beside the booth, looking uncertain, but when Gavin reached out instinctively, Malik took his hand. The warmth was small, but it burned through Gavin's chest like sunlight after a decade of cold. Naomi's voice caught in her throat as she watched Jonah squeeze Gavin like he'd known him forever. The hug was innocent, instinctual, but it cracked something open inside her chest. Her hand moved slightly across the table, as if to reach for one of the boys, then fell back to her lap. Gavin barely moved. He was too stunned, too full. His arms slowly came up to hold Jonah. In return, his hands trembling against the boy's tiny back. Jonah smelled like crayons and soap, like playgrounds and juice boxes, nothing like the conference rooms and city air Gavin was used to. Malik still stood, watching carefully, his hand resting in Gavin's, like it had always belonged there. Naomi cleared her throat. "Boys, come here, please." Jonah let go reluctantly. Malik glanced between the 2 adults and then back at his brother before following her voice. "They shouldn't, she started but didn't finish. Mrs. Penny had stopped wiping the counter, watching with a softness in her eyes. She caught Naomi's gaze and gave a small understanding nod before turning to refill another customer's coffee. Naomi bent to the boys. "Let's not rush strangers, okay?" "But he's not a stranger," Jonah insisted. "He knew our names." Naomi paused. Her lips parted as if to explain something, but the weight of 10 years sat heavy on her tongue. Instead, she touched their backs gently. "Let's go. We're late." The boys didn't argue, but as they walked toward the door, Jonah looked over his shoulder and waved. Gavin raised his hand slowly in return, but his face betrayed him. He wasn't okay. Naomi turned once more before stepping out, her eyes locking with Gavin's. It was a flash, 2 seconds, maybe 3, but it carried the force of an entire decade. Questions, anger, longing. All wordless, all burning. By the time the door jingled shut behind them, Gavin felt hollow. He stared at the seat across from him. Her coffee cup still had a lipstick mark on the rim. Her flyer sat there like a dare. Mrs. Penny approached quietly, picking up the plates. "She's a good woman," she said softly, not looking directly at him. "I know," Gavin replied. "She didn't cry for years after she moved here. Not once. But she laughs now. Her boys make her laugh." Gavin knotted his throat tight. Mrs. Penny studied him. "You hurt her bad." "Yeah." She placed a napkin down in front of him. "Then don't come back unless you're real sure what you're fixing to do." Gavin left a generous tip and stepped out into the morning sun. It was warmer now, the sky shedding its early haze. He walked slowly, unsure if he was following a path or just his guilt. Past the park where children screamed with joy, past porches with pumpkins still out from Halloween. He stopped when he reached his car, but didn't open the door. Instead, he sat on the hood and pulled out the sketch from his wallet. It was creased from too much handling. Now the crayon colors faded slightly. The stick figures were simple. A tall woman, 2 smaller boys, and a 4th figure, taller, broader, with a question mark, where the face should have been. Underneath, someone had written, "Our family." He closed his eyes. Once in college, Naomi had invited him to her first gallery showing. It was a small event, just a handful of students displaying paintings and sketches. He'd promised to come, but the firm hosting his internship had scheduled a last-minute dinner with investors. He chose the dinner. She never brought it up again. He did, though, in his own mind. Every time he missed a moment, every time his life moved forward, while hers stayed behind quiet and invisible, he remembered. Gavin didn't know if he could fix any of it, but he knew this: he didn't want to disappear again. Not now. Not when the damage had names and voices and little hands that clutched his in trust. That evening he sat alone in the Airbnb with takeout from the corner deli and a notebook open in his lap. He started writing, not sure what the letter would say, not sure if she'd read it, but needing to try. He wrote until the words blurred, then folded the note, slid it into the flyer she'd left behind, and tucked it inside an envelope. Down the street, Naomi sat parked outside her house, watching her front door like it might vanish if she blinked. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary. The twins had fallen asleep in the back, exhausted from school and stories and whatever it was they'd sensed about today. She hadn't told them who Gavin was. She wasn't ready. Maybe she wouldn't ever be, but her voice betrayed her. She whispered into the stillness of the car, her eyes wet. "Why now, Gavin?" Naomi always said courtrooms weren't for people like her, but now her whole motherhood is being questioned by someone who's never changed a diaper. Rain slicked the sidewalks outside the Emery Nash Law Office, casting reflections of red brake lights and gray umbrellas onto the soaked pavement. Naomi stepped carefully from her car, her thrifted rain boots squeaking slightly with each step. She held the boys' school permission slips in one hand, her knuckles white around the folded edges. She hadn't slept much. Not since the letter arrived Friday evening demanding a preliminary meeting to discuss custodial entitlement. She hadn't asked for this. Inside the lobby buzzed with low murmurs and the occasional click of wet heels. The air was a mix of cheap office coffee and that anxious humidity that came with paperwork and waiting. Naomi's coat was damp by the time she stepped into the elevator, but her posture remained straight, her face unreadable. Gavin was already seated in the waiting room when she arrived on the 12th floor. Pressed charcoal suit, black umbrella resting against his polished shoe phone in hand, but unread. He stood when he saw her, unsure whether to smile or stay still. He chose stillness. Naomi glanced at him briefly, offering a nod that was more obligation than greeting. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I had to be here," he replied, voice low. "For them." Naomi didn't answer. The receptionist, a pale woman with burgundy lipstick and stiff posture, called out, "Ms. Brooks, Mr. Shaw, you can follow me now." They were led down a corridor lined with framed diplomas and a bronze bust of someone Naomi didn't recognize. The conference room had high ceilings and tall windows streaked with rain. A large wooden table dominated the space. An American flag stood in the corner, unmoved, as if even it didn't want to be here. Mr. Emery Nash stood to greet them, a tall man with silver hair, glasses perched at the edge of his nose, and a calm demeanor that felt too practiced. Next to him, Josie Truitt sat cross-legged, young black, and crackling with energy under a blazer too large for her frame. Naomi had met her only twice, but something about the girl's fire made her feel less alone. Then the door opened again. Francine Shaw entered like a gust of cold air. Her heels didn't make a sound on the thick carpet, but her presence was unmistakable. Dressed in an ivory coat that surely cost more than Naomi's rent. Pearls resting neatly on her collarbone, Francine didn't so much as glance in Naomi's direction. She sat at the head of the table. "I trust we can be civilized," she said to no one in particular, unfolding a crisp folder. "This isn't personal. It's about what's best for the children." Naomi stiffened. "Ms. Brooks," Mr. Nash began. "You've been the sole guardian for 6 years. This meeting is to discuss potential shared rights, considering Mr. Shaw's biological connection to the boys." Naomi looked directly at him. He wasn't there when they were born. He wasn't there when Jonah had pneumonia at 2, or when Malik broke his wrist last year. So no, this isn't about biology. It's about consistency. Francine interjected smoothly. "With all due respect, you chose to disappear." "My son wasn't given a choice." Josie leaned forward, her voice cool. "Ms. Shaw, we're not litigating absence. We're here to understand what motivated this sudden interest in custody. Interest that, let's be clear, didn't come from Mr. Shaw himself, but from you." Francine's expression didn't flicker. "Blood matters more than vows. Naomi took away our rights when she took those children." Naomi's nails dug into the fabric of her skirt. "They're not yours to take back." Gavin, quiet until now, looked between them. "This isn't the way." Naomi turned her eyes on him, sharp and unwavering. "This is not your redemption story, Gavin." He recoiled slightly. Josie shuffled her papers, then lifted one. "The boys have been enrolled in school here, thriving under Ms. Brooks's care, supported by community programs. Ms. Brooks teaches art at the local center. Her neighbor, Ms. Hattie, wrote a letter describing their family life as loving and respectful." "What exactly is unsuitable about that?" Francine sniffed. "The neighborhood is not ideal. There's graffiti on the fences, and I've read that local scores, academic and safety, are below state average." "Children aren't statistics," Josie said evenly. Mr. Nash held up a hand. "Let's not turn this into a debate. We're here to determine if further action is warranted." Naomi exhaled slowly. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room. "If anyone had asked, I would have welcomed a conversation, but no one asked. You came in with lawyers and assumptions. You treated my life like a file folder you could rewrite." Gavin rubbed his temple. "This wasn't what I wanted." Naomi's gaze pierced him. "But it's what you allowed." The silence stretched long. Gavin pushed his chair back and stood. "I need some air." He walked out, not looking at anyone, not even her. Outside the conference room, the hallway was quiet, save for the soft tick of a wall clock and the muted hiss of the rain against the windows. Gavin leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. He didn't notice Josie until she stopped beside him. "You can't fix this with guilt," she said quietly. "Show up or step aside." Then she disappeared back into the room, leaving him alone. The courthouse cafeteria was nearly empty, save for a janitor mopping near the vending machines and a man arguing with someone over speakerphone in Spanish. Gavin sat at a small table in the corner, staring at a cup of untouched coffee. The rain made the windows look like someone had painted them with grief. His tie felt too tight, his breath too shallow. He hadn't meant to walk out like that. But when Naomi said, "This is not your redemption story," something inside him cracked. She was right. He had been too late. And now his mother was bulldozing through a life she knew nothing about. He pulled out the drawing again, the one from the airport. 4 stick figures. One tall, 2 small. A woman. The tall one had a question mark for a face. They hadn't even named him. Just a question. He traced the little crayon lines with his finger, wondering what kind of bedtime stories Naomi told them, wondering if they ever asked why the tall man in their drawings didn't come around. A soft knock on the table broke his thoughts. Josie stood there holding a styrofoam cup. "They've taken a break upstairs. Ms. Brooks is talking to Mr. Nash. You might want to be there when they resume." Gavin looked up. "Is she okay?" "She's Naomi Brooks," Josie said with a hint of pride. "She doesn't crumble. She folds, straightens, and keeps going." He half smiled. "You admire her." "I do. You should too." "I always did," Gavin said. "Just didn't know how to show it." Josie nodded once, as if confirming something to herself. "Then you have a decision to make, Mr. Shaw. Are you going to be the man in that drawing with the question mark? Or are you going to fill in your own face?" She walked away before he could answer. Back in the conference room, Naomi stood at the window, her arms crossed. Her eyes didn't leave the cityscape even when Gavin re-entered the room. She looked like someone who'd spent years learning how not to flinch. Francine was seated again, flipping through documents with performative patience. Mr. Nash spoke first. "If I may suggest, this matter could be resolved with a mutual visitation agreement. A slow integration, supervised if necessary." Naomi turned from the window. "Supervised like I'm the threat." "No," Mr. Nash said gently. "Supervised so the boys have a chance to understand, to ask questions, to feel safe," Josie added, "and to protect the emotional security they've already built with Naomi." Gavin cleared his throat. "I don't want to take them away. I don't want to uproot their lives. I just want to be part of them. If they'll let me." Naomi blinked slowly. "You think it's about you being ready?" Francine opened her mouth, but Naomi raised a hand, not rudely but firmly. "They already have a life," she continued. "Friends, routines, teachers who know which one prefers blue crayons and which one hides peas in his napkin. They have bedtime stories and Saturday pancakes and a mom who's learned how to fix a leaky pipe without Googling it." Francine scoffed. "Is this a monologue or a negotiation?" Josie cut in. "It's called context. Something courts appreciate." Mr. Nash sighed, folding his hands. "Look, this doesn't need to go to trial. Mr. Shaw has rights. Ms. Brooks has history. The question is, do the adults in this room trust each other enough to figure it out without dragging 2 6-year-olds through a legal storm?" Naomi's jaw tightened. She looked at Gavin, then at the flag in the corner, the one that hadn't moved since she walked in. "My answer is yes," she said finally. If Gavin is doing this for them, not because of guilt or pressure." Francine's head snapped around. "Excuse me?" Gavin raised his hand. "She's right, Mother. This isn't your fight. You don't get to orchestrate my involvement like it's a business acquisition." Francine stood. "You're my son. You have responsibilities." "To who?" Gavin asked. "To boys I didn't know existed because you told me Naomi left out of selfishness, or to the woman who's been raising them without a dime from me and never once asked for a favor." Silence filled the room. Even Josie looked momentarily stunned. Francine's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Mr. Nash shifted in his seat. "Perhaps we should draft a preliminary outline for visitation and check-in dates." "Miss Brooks," Naomi looked at Gavin. "I'll talk to the boys," she said quietly. "They'll decide how fast or slow this goes." Josie handed her a simple form. Naomi took it, but didn't sign yet. She glanced at Gavin once more. "You don't get to walk in with apologies and expect a parade." "I know. And don't bring your mother next time." "I won't." Josie exhaled audibly, as if releasing a held breath. Francine collected her things wordlessly and walked out, her heels louder this time, like an exclamation point trying too hard to end a sentence. As the door shut, Naomi leaned over to Josie. What are the odds I make it to pickup without crying in the car? Josie gave her a soft smile. 50-50 depending on traffic. They both laughed, quiet, tired, but real. And for the first time that morning, Gavin allowed himself to hope. Outside the courthouse, the rain had slowed to a mist, leaving the steps slick and shimmering. Naomi stood under the overhang, her fingers clenched tightly around the rolled-up visitation outline. Her thrifted rain boots, slightly too big, but dependable, squeaked each time she shifted weight from one foot to the other. She'd made it through, barely. But now came the harder part, explaining it all to her sons without unraveling the fragile world she'd spent 6 years building. The courthouse door creaked behind her. Josie stepped out first, slipping a file folder into her leather tote. "You did good," she said gently. Naomi gave a tight smile. "Good doesn't keep children from asking questions you can't answer." Josie paused. "Then just give them the answers you can. Kids know love when they see it, and they know when it's earned." Before Naomi could respond, Gavin exited behind them, his umbrella still closed at his side. He didn't move to stand beside her, just close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. "I won't show up unannounced again," he said. "You set the pace." She didn't reply at first. Her eyes followed a leaf tumbling down the steps in silence. Finally, she said, "You ever fix a wobbly table?" Gavin blinked. "What?" "A table," she repeated. "You don't slam a new leg under it. You wedge something small. A folded card. Napkin. Takes patience. Precision. You learn to listen for the balance." He nodded slowly. "You think that's what I need to do?" Naomi looked at him, not cruel, not bitter, just tired. "If you want to be in their lives, you better learn how to wedge gently. Because if you shake them too hard, everything comes crashing down." A horn honked faintly from the street. Josie's ride had arrived. "I'll be at the office tomorrow," Josie said to Naomi. "Bring me any questions." Then to Gavin with a measured look. "And you? Read some parenting blogs. Or better yet, just ask her what the boy's like. Start there." She left with a swish of her trench coat and a strength that belied her age. Gavin and Naomi stood in silence for a few more seconds. "I didn't know about them," he said again. Naomi didn't flinch. "And if you had," he exhaled. "I like to think I would have shown up." "That's the thing about showing up," she murmured. "It only counts when someone's looking for you." The rain began again, soft, steady. Naomi stepped away from the overhang, pulling her hood up as she descended the steps. "Naomi," Gavin called. She paused but didn't turn around. He hesitated, then said, "Can I walk you to your car?" She finally turned, the faintest raise of an eyebrow. "You remember where I parked?" Gavin almost smiled. "Let me guess, back lot near the tree with the missing bark." She nodded once, still observant. "Still trying," he replied. They walked side by side slowly through the damp gravel lot. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was something in between. A stillness that held room for both hurt and possibility. Naomi reached her car, a faded red sedan, with a cracked Hello Kitty sticker on the bumper. She unlocked it, then paused, her hand on the door handle. "Do they know?" Gavin asked softly. "The boys." She nodded. "They know they were made from love. I just never filled in the blanks." He looked at her with something almost like wonder. "You did all this? By yourself?" Naomi shrugged. "That's what mothers do. We build while bleeding." The rain fell harder now, tapping against metal and skin like quiet percussion. Gavin stepped back. "I'll wait for your word, whatever you decide." She opened her car door, tossed the paperwork onto the passenger seat, then stood still for a moment. "I'm not trying to keep you from them," she said without looking at him. "I'm trying to protect the peace we've earned. There's a difference." He nodded. "I see that now." Naomi climbed in and shut the door gently. The engine groaned before it turned over. She didn't wave as she pulled out. She just drove slowly, carefully, like someone who knew how much weight she carried. Gavin remained in the lot long after the taillights faded. He didn't open his umbrella, didn't move. Only when his phone buzzed in his coat pocket did he blink. It was from Francine. "Let me know when you're ready to be serious about this custody mess." He deleted the message without reading further. Then slowly he turned and began walking, not toward his rental car, but toward the sidewalk, toward the neighborhood Naomi called home, toward something he hadn't felt in years: conviction. At the same time, Naomi parked in front of her house and turned off the ignition. The porch light flickered on, automatically casting a soft glow on the walkway. Inside, she could see silhouettes: Malik bouncing on the couch, Jonah scribbling at the dining table. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deep. "I will not let them take my boys," she whispered to herself. And for the first time that day, the tears came, quiet and fierce. But she didn't wipe them away. When Naomi walked into the fall festival, she expected games and cider, not a wall full of her son's secrets. The scent of cinnamon popcorn and hay hit her first. Then came the music's soft notes from a jazz trio of middle schoolers doing their best rendition of Autumn Leaves. Maple Oak Elementary had gone all out this year. The gymnasium shimmered with fairy lights hung between rafters. Scarecrows leaned cheerfully beside tables, and painted pumpkins lined every windowsill. Naomi clutched a Tupperware container of mini vanilla cupcakes with burgundy sprinkles, Jada's favorite color, always present when Naomi needed a little strength. She walked toward the bake-off table, where Mrs. Penny, in a sunflower print apron, waved with both hands. "You made it," Mrs. Penny called out, placing a fresh pie onto a checkered cloth. "Lord, it smells like memories in here, doesn't it?" Naomi laughed lightly, setting her cupcakes down. "Only if your memories include fifth graders trying to bob for apples in a bowl meant for goldfish. I call that community character." Mrs. Penny winked. Around them, PTA moms in denim jackets zipped between booths, handing out raffle tickets and napkins. The smell of slow-cooker chili drifted from the lunch corner, and kids in flannel shirts zipped past with glitter glue still drying on their fingers. Naomi scanned the room once more, looking for two unmistakable heads of curls. Then she saw them, Malik and Jonah, bouncing around the craft station with paper leaf crowns on their heads. They waved when they spotted her. Before she could wave back, someone tapped her arm. She turned. Gavin stood there, holding a crate of bottled water, his gray hoodie slightly dusted with hay. His jeans were a little too crisp to be local, but the effort was clear. "I was told this goes to the teacher hydration station," he said, with a crooked grin. "You'll survive," Naomi replied, folding her arms. "I'm trying to blend in," he added, gesturing to his outfit. Naomi gave him a once-over. "You look like you wandered out of a catalog and into a hay bale." Progress. She didn't smile, but something in her gaze softened. "The twins are over by Crafts." "I saw them," Gavin said. "Jonah's crown is on sideways." "It usually is." He nodded, and for a moment the noise of the festival dimmed. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. "I appreciate you letting me help." "I didn't," she said evenly. "The principal did." Before he could answer, a paper airplane skimmed past Naomi's ear, followed by a chorus of giggles. "I should check on them," she said, already moving. Gavin followed her gaze, but stayed rooted. It was enough for now. At the craft table, Malik proudly showed off his pumpkin, made from painted yarn. "It's for Miss Hattie," he said, "so her house feels like fall." Jonah grinned and handed Naomi a sticky popsicle stick creation. "Mine's a jet car. It can fly and do flips." Naomi kissed both their foreheads and reminded them to be kind to their glue. Not far behind, Gavin helped stack chairs near the stage where the student band was setting up. Ms. Darnell, the twins' teacher, gave him a polite nod. "You're Mr. Gavin?" she asked. "I am. I've read your name on a few homework journals lately," she smiled. "The boys have been expressive." "I hope that's a good thing." Ms. Darnell tilted her head. "Children don't lie well. They've been happier." He swallowed. "That's good to hear." She nodded and moved off, clipboard in hand. Later, as the chili contest wrapped up and music filled the gym again, Naomi wandered toward the far corner where Ms. Darnell had put together the parent honor wall. It was a large bulletin board covered in brown craft paper lined with red maple leaves and pinned with dozens of crayon drawings, thank you notes, and Polaroid pictures. Naomi scanned it absent-mindedly at first until a certain messy scrawl caught her eye. It was a torn page from Jonah's notebook. A wobbly spaceship hovered above a stick-figure man holding a flashlight. "Thank you, Mr. Gavin, for fixing our night light and reading our space book." Her breath hitched. She stepped closer, fingers trembling as they hovered over the paper. Right below it, in Malik's careful hand, "Thank you for not laughing when we got scared of the thunder. Thank you for sitting with us." Naomi turned away quickly. She didn't want anyone to see her cry, not here, not when she was still so unsure of everything. She pushed through the side door of the gym, the crisp fall air hitting her cheeks like cold water. Behind the gym, beside stacked hay bales and a wagon of boxed prizes, Gavin stood alone. He was wiping chili off his sleeve with a napkin, clearly missing more than he got. Naomi didn't say anything at first. She just looked at him, her eyes red but dry. He saw her and stilled. "You okay?" She stepped closer. "They've never written about anyone but me," she whispered. "Not even their teachers." He said nothing because he knew words wouldn't do. He simply nodded, allowing the weight of what she said to land. She stood there a moment longer before asking softly, "Are you planning to stay long enough for this to matter?" Gavin didn't flinch. "I already stayed too long to walk away." The music inside the gym had shifted again. Now a familiar tune from a decades-old jazz standard played softly under the hum of conversation and laughter. Naomi stood frozen for a beat, Gavin's words echoing in her chest. "I already stayed too long to walk away." She didn't respond, not with words. Instead, she nodded barely and turned back toward the gym, heart unsteady. Gavin stayed behind for a moment, watching the orange leaves swirl around the school's playground in lazy spirals. Back inside, the boys had found the apple bobbing station and were already soaked. Naomi grabbed towels from a supply bin and crouched beside them, helping Jonah wipe sticky water from his cheeks. Mr. Gavin watched us bob. Malik grinned. "He cheered when I almost got one." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Almost, huh?" Jonah chimed in. "He said it was still brave." She chuckled. "Well, bravery counts for something." At the bake sale table, Gavin joined Mrs. Penny to help serve slices of pie. She handed him a paper plate and gestured toward Naomi. "That one's lemon meringue. Make sure it ends up in the right hands." He blinked. "Naomi likes lemon." "She likes truth," Mrs. Penny said with a smile. "Lemon just reminds her." Later in the afternoon, after the raffle drawing, and just before cleanup, Gavin found Naomi sitting at the edge of the bleachers watching the twins run circles around a scarecrow. He walked up quietly, holding 2 paper cups of cider. "One of these is non-alcoholic." I think he teased. She accepted the cup. "If I wake up dancing on hay bales, I'll blame you." They sipped in silence for a while. "You're good with them," she said finally. "I didn't expect it," Gavin admitted. "But they make it easy." Naomi gave a soft nod. Her sweater sleeves were pulled over her hands, a habit she hadn't lost since college. Comfort through fabric. "You talked to Ms. Darnell?" she asked without looking at him. He hesitated, briefly. "And she said they're expressive," he said with a quiet smile. "I'm guessing that's a compliment." Naomi looked down at her cider voice low. "They've been through a lot. Moved homes, changed schools. I try not to let them feel it." "They're happy," Gavin said firmly. "That's because of you." She blinked, touched but cautious. "Don't try to fix this with praise." "I'm not." He placed his cup down. "I'm trying to fix it with presence." Before she could respond, Malik ran up holding a paper leaf. "Mama, we forgot to sign the big thank you card for the janitors." Naomi stood and followed him to the table, but Gavin stayed behind for a moment, watching the way she moved through her world. Quiet, capable, loved. Later, as the last tables were folded and the lights dimmed, Gavin stood beside Naomi at her car. "You did good today," she said quietly. "I'll take that as a win." She opened her car door, then paused. "See you tomorrow." He looked surprised. "You want me to come?" "The boys will ask," she said, sliding into the driver's seat. Might as well save them the trouble. The car pulled off into the fading light. Gavin stood there in the empty parking lot, cider cup in hand, a slow smile spreading across his face. Sunday brought quiet skies and golden leaves. Naomi's porch swing creaked gently under her as she watched the boys chalk dinosaurs across the driveway. The warmth of the fall festival still lingered in her chest, like the last notes of a song. Inside, a single sheet of construction paper rested on the kitchen counter. It was the same one Jonah had taped to the honor wall yesterday, carefully removed by Ms. Darnell, and handed to Naomi with a knowing glance. She'd reread it 3 times already. "Thank you, Mr. Gavin, for fixing our nightlight and reading our space book." It was written in crayon blocky and misspelled, but the sentiment was clear. They trusted him. She wasn't sure she did. Not yet, but they did. Later that afternoon, Gavin returned to the elementary school alone, helping Mrs. Penny carry leftover pie tins and decorations to her minivan. He stayed behind to sweep the gym floors, even when no one asked. "Don't think I don't notice you sticking around," Mrs. Penny said, watching him fold another chair. "I'm not trying to impress anyone," he replied. "That's exactly why it's working," she smiled. "And for what it's worth, those boys walk taller when you're around." Gavin paused, holding the last folded table in place. "You think I should stay?" Mrs. Penny looked him straight in the eye. "I think you should decide if you're showing up for them or for redemption." That night, Naomi found herself standing in front of her closet, fingers grazing the soft sleeve of her burgundy sweater, Jada's favorite color. Her sister used to wear it to every school event, every art show, even their mother's birthday dinners. That memory made Naomi smile and ache. She turned off the bedroom light and checked on the boys, now fast asleep in a tangle of blankets and Lego bricks. The flyer for her weekend art class fluttered on the fridge as she passed. Monday morning came with the scent of toast and orange marmalade. Gavin stood at the door with a tray of donuts and a flask of fresh coffee. "I figured I owe you breakfast," he said, shifting on his feet. Naomi raised an eyebrow. "That depends on whether those are the jelly-filled kind." Gavin opened the box like a magician revealing a trick. 4 jelly, 2 glazed. No funny business. She let him in. The boys ran up, voices tumbling over each other, asking about moon rocks and flashlight batteries and whether Mr. Gavin had a dog. "I used to," he said. "A bulldog named Rex. He snored louder than I did." They giggled, clinging to his arms like vines. Naomi watched from the kitchen, stirring creamer into her cup. "Don't think I missed you sweet-talking your way through breakfast," she called out. Gavin leaned around the corner. "It's the donuts, isn't it?" Maybe she smirked. That evening, as the sun dipped low over Savannah, Gavin pulled into the diner parking lot again. He hadn't planned on going in, just driving by. But inside he saw the Thanksgiving pageant flyer pinned beside Naomi's art class ad. A dozen sticky notes surrounded it, each with names of volunteers. He walked in, grabbed a pen, and added his name. Naomi was wiping tables when she noticed. "You're volunteering now. Figured you could use someone tall to hang decorations," he said, avoiding her eyes. She set down her rag. "They're going to get attached." "I'm already there." She paused. The silence between them thickened but softened too. Naomi stepped closer. "You want a second chance?" "No," Gavin said softly. "I want a first chance to do it right." Outside, the jazz band from yesterday rehearsed again on the lawn. The same notes drifted through the window, autumn leaves, delicate and nostalgic. Naomi stood still, listening. Then she nodded once slowly. "Then don't miss the pageant." And with that, she turned away. He once believed love was power and profit, but that Thanksgiving Gavin gave them something no one could price a name. The smell of brown sugar and cinnamon filled Naomi's kitchen as collard greens simmered on the back burner and her pecan pie cooled on the windowsill. Outside, dusk painted the sky in strokes of cranberry and orange. Inside, her dining table stretched longer than it ever had borrowed. Folding chairs lined both sides, and candlelight shimmered across mismatched plates. Naomi wiped her hands on a dish towel and took in the scene. Kids dashing around in crinkly construction paper turkey hats, Miss Hattie humming along to a gospel playlist, and Gavin, tall, awkwardly graceful, adjusting the folding legs on a card table like he'd been doing it his whole life. He looked out of place and completely at home all at once. She didn't know who this man was anymore. A week ago, she would have sworn she'd never trust him. But now, watching him balance a jug of sweet tea while gently telling Jonah not to run near the candles, she wasn't so sure. Naomi felt the soft tap of small fingers against her hip. Malik stood there holding 2 name tags made from torn construction paper and glitter glue. "Mama," he whispered, glancing nervously at the dining room. "Can we put these on our plates?" She knelt, brushing hair from his forehead. "Let me see." The first tag read, Jonah Brooks Shaw, in crooked handwriting, and the second, Malik Brooks Shaw. Her breath caught in her throat. "Did you make these?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Ms. Darnell helped us spell it. We didn't tell nobody. Just wanted it to be a surprise." Naomi looked toward Gavin, who was now kneeling to tie Miss Hattie's shoe. His hands moved carefully, reverently, like every gesture held weight. "I think it'll be a beautiful surprise," she whispered. Later, when the dishes were full and the table packed, Gavin stood up slowly, clearing his throat. He wore no blazer tonight, just a cream sweater rolled at the wrists and dark slacks. Naomi noticed he hadn't worn a watch. He always wore a watch, but not tonight. "I'd like to say something," he said. The room hushed except for Malik giggling at something Jonah had whispered. Gavin held up a small hand-bound book wrapped in twine. "I brought a gift," he said, offering it to Naomi across the table. "It's called Our Story. The first page is blank because I think we get to write it together. No pressure, no timelines, just honesty." Naomi didn't reach for it. She just stared. Gavin took a breath and continued. "To the woman who raised 2 miracles and never asked for a witness," he said, voice lower, now trembling, "thank you." Across the table, one of the neighbors sniffled. Naomi swallowed hard, lips parting to speak, but the front door creaked open before she could. Heads turned. Francine Shaw stood in the entryway, clutching an old photograph. She wore a charcoal coat with pearl buttons and no umbrella, though her hair was perfectly in place. No one said a word. She didn't speak, didn't ask permission, didn't glare or command. Instead, she walked slowly to the table, placed the photo Gavin as a boy in his Sunday best next to the pie, and sat down silently in an empty chair between Miss Hattie and a toddler gnawing on cornbread. Gavin's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't flinch. Naomi caught his eye. He gave the smallest nod, like, "Let it be." So she did. The boys squirmed in their seats, trying not to laugh. The name tags were in their laps, hidden like treasure. Malik finally whispered, "Now." Naomi smiled. "Now." With a flourish, only 6-year-olds could muster, the twins slapped the name tags onto their plates, then onto their chests. Gasps and laughter filled the air. Jonah stood on his chair. "I'm Jonah Brooks Shaw now." Malik followed, raising both arms like a tiny superhero. "Me too." Naomi pressed her hands to her heart. Gavin's mouth parted, but no words came, just wet eyes and a quiet smile. She stood slowly, knees weak but spine straight. Gavin looked up at her, and for a second it felt like time slowed. The music faded, the chatter dulled, and all that remained was the question burning between them. "I'm not here for a title," he said gently, "or to fix what I broke. I'm just hoping to be part of what's already beautiful. If you'll have me, I'd like to share the name too." Naomi didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, she looked around the room. The casserole dishes, the giggling kids, Francine silently sipping cider beside a woman from Naomi's church, the folded napkins her boys had written jokes on. She looked back at Gavin. And then she whispered, "Say it." He blinked. "What?" "Say their names, Gavin." Out loud, with pride. Gavin stood a little taller, his voice low but steady. He turned to the boys who were now watching him with wide eyes and cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jonah Brooks Shaw," he said, first letting the name linger in the air like a blessing. Jonah's face lit up, his little chest puffing out. Gavin turned to the second boy, Malik Brooks Shaw. Malik clapped and someone at the table chuckled through tears. Naomi didn't say anything for a long moment, but her eyes spoke volumes. They shimmered, reflecting the candles, and a decade of emotion too vast to name. She took a breath like it might anchor her, then nodded not just to Gavin, but to the room, the community, the life she'd built. That moment was small and soft and everything. The boys settled back into their chairs, now fussing over cranberry sauce and whispering jokes. Plates clinked, laughter returned, and the conversation rolled forward like a gentle tide. Gavin took his seat again, unsure what to do with his hands, until Jonah grabbed one and pulled it into his lap. He held it there while chewing a biscuit, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Naomi's gaze flicked toward Francine, who sat still, hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't touched her plate, but she hadn't left either. Then, without a word, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out another photograph. This one showed Gavin at maybe 8 years old, sitting beside a much younger Francine on a park bench. The woman in the photo wore a red scarf. Naomi recognized it. It was the same one Jada used to wear. Francine slid the photo down the table until it rested near Naomi's plate. "His father took that," she murmured. Naomi was startled to hear her voice. Not because it was sharp, but because it wasn't. I thought you didn't come to talk, Naomi said quietly. I didn't, Francine replied, eyes still forward, just to see. Gavin didn't interrupt. He sat still, listening like a boy who finally understood silence was sacred. I've fought for a lot of wrong things, Francine continued, folding her napkin with mechanical precision. Position, legacy, control. She finally turned to Naomi. But you fought for those boys, even when no one was watching. Naomi's throat tightened. Francine looked down again, adjusting the pearl on her wrist. I won't interfere anymore. There were no grand gestures, no hugs, just the weight of history shifting 1 inch to the left, enough to make room for someone new. Outside, laughter rang out. The kids had moved to the porch, chasing each other with paper leaves and plastic cups. Gospel music floated from a speaker. Someone had moved to the window. Mahalia Jackson, sweet and sure. Inside, Gavin quietly gathered empty plates, one after another. He didn't ask. He just moved, fluid and present. Naomi noticed how he refilled drinks, scooped leftovers into foil, handed a toddler a napkin when she sneezed. It was in the details, the small invisible ways, that told her he'd learned how to love without applause. Need help? He asked. Naomi stood stacking utensils. That's the first time you've asked all night. I've been watching, he said, his voice low, trying not to mess it up. She handed him the pie tin. You haven't. They moved through the kitchen like muscle memory, not speaking much. Gavin scrubbed a casserole dish while Naomi wrapped cornbread. Every now and then, they caught each other's eye and looked away just as quickly. Francine excused herself, nodding once to Naomi before slipping out the front door. Gavin didn't try to stop her. Naomi didn't either. After the last dish was dried and put away, Naomi stepped out onto the porch. The boys were lying on their backs, counting stars and giggling over shapes in the sky. Gavin joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. The porch light cast a soft glow on her earrings, teardrop-shaped antique gold. Jada's, he asked. She nodded. She loved Thanksgiving, said it made people kinder. Gavin leaned against the porch rail. She was right. They watched in silence for a moment before Naomi turned to him. You didn't have to say yes. He looked puzzled. The name, the boys, this. She gestured toward the house, the community, the weight of everything she'd carried alone. I didn't do it for them to like me, he said. I did it because I wanted to stop hiding from the parts of me I left behind. Naomi's mouth curled into something like a smile, tentative but real. From the yard, Malik's voice piped up. Mama, we made up a handshake. Gavin grinned. Can I learn it too? The twins ran to the porch in matching turkey hats, grabbing Gavin's hands as if they belonged there. Naomi watched them beneath the flicker of candlelight from the windows inside. The table had emptied, the pie was mostly gone, and laughter still lingered in the floorboards. Peace, she thought. Not perfection, but peace. Later that night, the last of the neighbors filtered out with foil-wrapped leftovers and warm hugs. Someone had forgotten their casserole dish, but Naomi knew they'd be back for it in the morning. The house smelled like nutmeg and joy. Malik and Jonah were finally asleep, curled together under a blanket on the living room floor, their turkey hats discarded beside them like fallen crowns. Naomi tucked them in, gently brushing stray curls from their faces. She paused for a moment, watching the slow rise and fall of their breathing. When she stood up, Gavin was already by the door with his coat in hand. He didn't speak, just looked at her like he wasn't sure what the right words were anymore. You're not leaving already, are you? She asked softly. I don't want to overstay, he said, voice quiet, uncertain. Naomi tilted her head. Then don't. He smiled, almost relieved, and set the coat back on the hook. They stood in the doorway for a beat, the quiet wrapping around them like a soft scarf. In the kitchen, the last of the candles flickered low. Naomi walked over and picked one up, shielding it with her hand as she blew it out gently. One by one, the others followed, until only one remained at the center of the table. Gavin watched as Malik shuffled into the room, half asleep, dragging a small blanket. The boy climbed onto a chair and looked at the last candle. Can I blow it out? He asked, voice groggy. Naomi nodded. You sure can, baby. Malik leaned forward, took a deep breath, then paused. Let's do this every year, he whispered, then puffed his cheeks and blew the flame away. The room fell into a hush, soft and holy. Outside, the night was cold but gentle. Gavin and Naomi stepped onto the porch shoulder to shoulder. The stars were brighter now, spread like tiny declarations across the velvet sky. The boys were asleep again this time in their own beds. Naomi had settled them in, kissed their foreheads, and whispered her nightly promise. You are loved. You are enough. She glanced sideways at Gavin, who was running his fingers along the porch rail like he was trying to memorize it. What now? She asked. He turned to her hands tucked in his jacket pockets. Now I wait for you to tell me what's next. Naomi chuckled softly. You really think I've got all the answers? I think you've always known the ones that matter. They stood in silence again, broken only by the distant sound of someone's screen door creaking open and shut. Naomi leaned against the post. You were good with them today. I meant what I said, Gavin replied. I stayed too long to walk away. She studied him carefully. The sharp edges had softened. The calculated precision that used to follow him into every room had been replaced with something simpler, patience perhaps, or maybe humility. Do you still think love is something to earn? She asked. He shook his head slowly. No, I think it's something to return. The porch light buzzed faintly above them. Naomi looked at his face the way his eyes held hers, like she was more than just a decision he hadn't made yet. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. And peace. She stepped toward the door, then turned back one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. So, you staying for dessert? A smile tugged at Gavin's mouth. You got pecan pie left. Only the corner piece. He reached for the door. That's the best part. Naomi held it open for him, and as they stepped back inside, into the soft glow of familiarity and something like family, it didn't feel like a beginning or an ending. It just felt like home. That Thanksgiving, there were no grand speeches, no second chances, declared just a long table, two boys beaming, and a name spoken with quiet pride. Gavin had once measured life in shares and silence, but Naomi taught him something gentler. Real love shows up and stays. Sometimes the most lasting gifts aren't wrapped in ribbon, but whispered in hallways, scribbled on honor walls, or carried in the laugh of a child who finally feels seen. Because when judgment falls away, kindness finds room to grow, like a porch light left on for someone finding their way home. Compassion doesn't need to be loud to be bright. If this story warmed your heart, perhaps you know someone who's still waiting for their own quiet return. Don't underestimate the power of being that light.